All right, let's talk about something huge, justice. It's a word we hear all the time, but what does it really, truly mean? And where did our ideas about what's fair even come from? Well, we're going to go on a 4,000-year journey to find out. Let's dive in. I mean, really think about it for a second. From silly arguments on the playground when you were a kid to massive Supreme Court decisions, we are obsessed with fairness. But here's the thing, that sense of what's right and wrong, it wasn't just handed to us. It was fought for, it was debated, and it was built piece by piece over thousands of years.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The origin of the word justice itself, it comes from the Latin word jus. Now, we hear that and we think right or law, but its ancient meaning was much, much tougher. It meant a binding, a yoke, an obligation. So the very first idea of justice wasn't about setting you free. It was about the rules that would literally bind a society together.
So how do you even start building those rules? Well, for most of early human history, justice was pretty simple and pretty brutal. Personal revenge. But then, around 4,000 years ago, a totally revolutionary new technology showed up, the written rule book. Now, you had some early attempts at this, like the Code of Renamu, but the big one, the one everyone knows, is the Code of Hammurabi in Babylon from around 1790 BCE. And listen, these weren't just friendly suggestions. They were complete legal systems carved right into stone, and they were around long before even the Ten Commandments. And just think about how massive a shift this was. Carving laws into a pillar meant they were permanent. A king couldn't just change the rules on a whim because he was in a bad mood. For the first time, justice wasn't just what some powerful person felt was right at that moment. It was a predictable system, and the government would enforce it. This was an absolute game changer for building stable societies. Of course, the most famous principle from Hammurabi's code is an eye for an eye. And on the surface, that sounds like perfect, balanced justice, right? The punishment fits the crime. But, oh, there was a catch. This early justice was anything but blind. In fact, it was specifically designed to be unequal. The punishment you got depended entirely on your social status. Check this out. A free man strikes another free man. He just pays a fine. But a slave does the exact same thing to a free man. They cut off his hand. Justice wasn't about fairness. It was a tool to keep the social hierarchy exactly where it was. And to really hammer this home, get this number. According to the code, the value of a pregnant slave was considered to be just 1/3 the value of a free man's eyeball. 1/3. So the big takeaway here is, while writing laws down was a huge step, the idea of equal justice for all, nope, that was still a long, long way off. So for centuries, the basic rule was simple. Laws are for the common people. Kings and rulers, they were above all that. The next giant leap in our story is the moment that whole idea starts to crumble. And for that, we have to go to medieval England. Before the year 1215, the setup was simple. The king's word was absolute. He could take your property, throw you in jail for no reason. He could change the rules whenever he felt like it. He didn't just enforce the law. In a very real sense, he was the law. And then came the Magna Carta. A group of rebellious barons forced King John to sign this thing, and in doing so, they established a truly revolutionary principle. For the first time ever, a king was explicitly placed under the law. This was the birth of the rule of law. The Magna Carta introduced ideas that are the bedrock of modern justice today, and a lot of them ended up right in the U.S. Constitution. It guaranteed certain freedoms, it set up the right to a trial by a jury of your peers, and maybe most important of all, it put limits on the power of the government itself. So, the Magna Carta put the king in check, but the authority for the law was still seen as coming from the top down. The next revolution, during the Enlightenment, would flip that idea completely on its head. You had these brilliant philosophers, people like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who came up with this radical new theory, the social contract. They argued that a government's right to rule doesn't come from God or a royal bloodline. No, it comes from the consent of the people. From us, we all mutually agree to follow the rules for the good of everyone. And where do you see this idea in action? You don't have to look any further than the American Declaration of Independence. That iconic phrase is the social contract in its purest form. It's the argument that your rights aren't a gift from a ruler. You're born with them. So this is the crucial point. This total inversion of power. The authority to make and enforce laws was taken from the hands of the one and put into the hands of the many.
The ultimate source of justice was now we the people. But, you guessed it, just like with Hammurabi's code, there was another catch. That soaring ideal of equality in the Declaration, well, it had some very real, very harsh limits. The men who wrote those incredible words also enslaved people. The unalienable rights they declared didn't extend to the people they held in bondage, nor did they apply to women. It just goes to show you that the circle of who counts for justice has always been expanding, but it was still far from complete. And that brings us to the modern era. You see, the story of justice isn't just a history lesson. It's an ongoing, live debate. The fundamental questions are still being argued, but now with totally new ideas and in brand new arenas. Today, we tend to look at the debate through a few different lenses. Is justice retributive? Basically, a return to an eye for an eye, where the main goal is to punish the wrongdoer? Is it restorative, where the focus shifts to repairing the harm done to the victim and the community? Or is it distributive, which asks a much bigger question? Is society itself fair, and does it give everyone a fair shot and fair access to resources? There's still no single settled answer. And the concept just keeps evolving. We now grapple with these massive, complex ideas like justice on a global scale, through international courts, universal human rights, and even new frontiers like environmental justice and digital rights. Every single one of these is a brand new chapter in our 4,000-year-old story. So, from rules carved in stone to protect the powerful, to the idea that even kings are under the law, all the way to the radical notion that justice comes from the people themselves, this has been our journey. The quest to define what's fair is a core part of the human story. And since that story is never finished, it leaves us all with one final question to think about.